It's not either of our high school careers, but it is the rankings in the college football playoff. And the news last night was that there really wasn't any news. The top 7 stayed the same. It includes the top 3 Big Ten teams. Third straight week, the Big Ten has had 3 of the top 7. We did see Wisconsin and Iowa move up a bit. Badgers to 15, Hawks to 17. Purdue dropping out after 1 week in the rankings. So big picture, Oklahoma was really the story. They lost. The committee hadn't held them in particularly high regard to begin with. Yeah. But from a Big Ten point of view or anything, is there anything that stood out to you here in these rankings?
The fact that it did sort of carry over from the previous week in a way that made sense, I suppose, was kind of news because I just assumed going in that the committee, as they tend to do from any given week, I thought they would feel the need to make some newsworthy sort of a move, whether it would be to sort of drop Cincinnati down for unknown reasons or, perhaps to finally flop Ohio State and Oregon. And they didn't do that either. The one I thought maybe would be most likely would be to sort of keep Notre Dame in the mix a bit more, maybe vault Notre Dame up multiple spots, even though Oklahoma was the only highly ranked team that ended up losing a game. They didn't do any of those things. So I think it's the poll that has made the most sense of any ones we've seen so far.
It does not seem unreasonable to me, though, that Notre Dame is still somewhat in this equation, right? Yeah. I think the real issue for Notre Dame is Cincinnati.
Right.
Cincinnati blocks them. And there was no doubt.
For multiple reasons, right?
Yes, there's no doubt. Like, if you watch that game, there was no doubt at all that Cincinnati was the better team, right? Yeah. And it was at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And so it just doesn't feel like there's any way that
Similar
Notre Dame...
to that Oregon-Ohio State situation, right, where I think Notre Dame is playing better than Cincinnati
No
right
doubt
now.
They're playing better,
yeah.
right? Yes.
But Cincinnati was the better team on their field that day. Oregon was the better team than Ohio State on their field that day, even though I think most of us agree Ohio State playing at a higher level than the Ducks have played at lately. And so you've got multiple reasons where Notre Dame, even as they continue to climb sort of steadily, there hasn't been enough carnage ahead of the Irish, and they won't have this season an ACC championship game to try to cement, sort of a resume for them. And you know how long the discussion's been going on about Notre Dame maybe joining a conference. This is just another version of that for whether or not it helps them or hurts them in a given season. It seems like this year it will be something that doesn't allow the Irish the opportunity to enhance their resume.
Right, and that is interesting. I think expanded playoff, though, would kind of put that on the side burner for Notre Dame. But I agree with you. I mean, obviously, if they were in a conference, well, I'm not sure the ACC would particularly help them this year, frankly, right?
Well, that's true.
You're not going to play anyone in the ACC championship game. Right. Wow, oh my goodness. Maybe Pitt or whatever.
Whether undefeated or one loss, the ACC just has not had it this year.
No, they haven't. Oklahoma State's interesting to me, too, just in that I think everyone was thinking Oklahoma had the only chance in the Big 12, and maybe Oklahoma State. It just feels like there's got to be chaos, though, for either one of those to really be in the conversation.
I wonder a little bit about that expanded playoff, and it's a slightly different discussion to have, but I think the discussions we have on days like today would be very different in a 12-team playoff scenario versus a 4. Folks do get really up in arms when there's only 4 teams that are going to make it. Wednesdays, after like a Tuesday 12-team playoff announcement where maybe it's not a top 25, maybe it's like a top 40 or top 60 or something, I don't know that there's as much consternation because there will be more teams in the mix, while at the same time, do you get as upset for a team who's not involved at the moment in that 12-team sort of parlay look? I don't know. I feel like there would be sort of less urgency and energy on a day like today.
If it's a top 40, you're going to have a really hard time finding anyone to be on that committee.
Well, hey, get Casey Kasem out here, man.
Exactly,
knock the dust off Casey. Get involved.
Yeah, that's about all you could do. And this is a big weekend, right? Because you think about the Ohio State-Oregon discussion, and you said, well, maybe this would be the week to do it. I think if there was a week to do it, it might be this week. Well, first of all, Oregon could just lose to Utah, which is eminently
which I believe they will.
Plausible. Yeah, I think a lot of people believe that they will. But also, it's a chance we're going to see Ohio State in a measuring stick game against a team the committee clearly holds in very high regard, and Oregon in a measuring stick game against a team the committee holds in mildly a high regard. And so to me, that's kind of where it might get interesting. So if there was a week where it was going to happen, that's probably it. Those are the 2 big games.
Because this is the most significant data point that Ohio State will have had the opportunity to achieve at this point. By the time they played Penn State, even though, going into the game, I said Penn State's playing better. I think they're going to challenge the Buckeyes. But Penn State had been unranked in the prior poll. They continue to be unranked at this point. So just sheerly from a metrics perspective, from a data perspective, who does the committee perceive as a legit foe to the Buckeyes? That is potentially Michigan State this week. So if Ohio State can pull this off, and obviously the inverse is accurate of that as well. If Michigan State pulls this off, because both teams, are looking to make a case for why they should be even higher. Ohio State already in that 4-team mix. Michigan State looking to vault not only their in-state rival, but several other teams to get into that top 4 mix. So this is the game. It's the top game in America. We saw what happened when it was a top 10 class between Big Ten squads when it was Michigan and Michigan State. The entire college football world was checking it out. It'll be the same situation this weekend between the Buckeyes and the Spartans.
I still have no doubt that if Ohio State wins out, they would be in the top 3.
Yeah.
Because how difficult these games are, right? I mean, you're talking about 2 top 7 teams here, and then let's say it's Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. That would be a real quality win.
I mean, could you make a case even beyond the top 3, perhaps?
Oh, yeah.
I
think they could end up number 2. Now,
right.
I think if Georgia wins out, Georgia's going to be number 1. But, yeah, I mean, they'd have a better resume. I mean, again,
they
unless
would have a better
Alabama
resume than
beats
Georgia by that point. Now, they wouldn't be perceived in the same
except for the
vein
fact
as
they'd
Georgia.
have a 1 in the loss column.
That's true, and that's very fair. But as far as their wins, they would have more quality wins. They would have higher regarded wins,
no
especially coming down the stretch, than the Bulldogs even have the potential of achieving at this point. And I think that the two sides of the ball, what it feels to me like the committee tends to value in their evaluation of things, if you're not viewed as a complete team, like they talk about Michigan being this super complete team, but Georgia's defense being this force of nature throughout the entirety of the season, that carries a lot of weight with the committee, even though their offense looks ordinary at times. Ohio State likely has an offense that's on par with the dominance, the proficiency of Georgia's defense, and that carries a lot of weight for the Buckeyes. It is that one loss that hangs over them, which is why they're not in that top 2 range at the moment.
Right. I thought it was interesting, Gary Barta last night, when he was praising Ohio State, basically praised only the offense.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
It was kind of what was left unsaid. Speaking of Gary Barta, had some interesting things to say about the ongoing kind of Michigan State debate. You see the tweet here from Stuart Mandel saying, set aside watching the games, though that is certainly a part of it, but statistically in just about every category, offensively and defensively, Michigan comes out on top over Michigan State. And then you see Stu added his okay then at the end there. And look, again, there are going to be people for whom you just can't get past the notion that Michigan State beat Michigan, and kind of the phrase set aside watching the games. I think there are some for whom that might not sit well, because it does kind of seem like this is about watching the games. Again, I'm not sure. I'm not one of these people who's screaming from the rooftops that this is a grave injustice, mainly because I think it plays itself out in the end, because they both play Ohio State. We'll get a sense for how good they are, and they both have quality games coming up down the stretch here. But that phrase, set aside watching the games?
Yes.
Do you bristle at that at all?
Not at all, man, because we can't just take a few words from a full discussion and say that this is something we need to use as chapter and verse. I mean, I've heard you talk about this aspect of the position that Gary Barta's in. Gary Barta's just the latest pincushion that the College Football Playoff Committee sets out in front of everyone as its chair to attempt to answer these questions, initially on camera to Reese Davis, and then to the assembled media in a Zoom call or whatever sort of conference call is there afterwards. But when you actually pay attention to the entirety of the discussion, there are layers to what he's actually talking about there. He's not saying we don't watch the film. He's not saying we don't care about what the film shows. He's specifically making the point, as he even referenced within that quote that we just put on the screen, it's not only about that film. And because I've already been pointing out, and the committee has already been pointing out, that we feel Michigan is a better team because of watching them. We think they're a more complete team because of what we've studied via the film. If you want to keep asking me about this, if you got all these follow-up questions about it, if we just set that part aside that we've already said, we believe Michigan's a better team because of what we're looking at, let's pay attention to some of the numbers as well. That is all he meant with that statement, and he even said it within the statement as he was being asked follow-up questions specific to that. And we've sort of lived through this a little bit already this season with like the whole Brett Bielema situation, where the full discussion gets lost in the midst of let's take like one phrase without sort of honoring what the full discussion of something actually was. And the simple way to phrase it is context. But the semantics that Gary Barta, that previous chairs have had to sort of hurdle their way through. After all of these shows, folks are going to find kind of a phrase or a word and sort of hold that against them or against the committee and try to relate it to a number of other things. he wasn't saying the film doesn't matter, and I feel like that folks just need to find something to be bothered by after every one of these, and especially since the rankings were exactly what we expected,
right.
Then there was nothing else to be bothered by except one half a sentence.
I'm with you. Look, I think it's a totally thankless task, and you're right. I say that people parse this like Holy Scripture, right?
Yeah.
They go through, and it's like the ancient scholars looking at every word to try to get some sort of deeper meaning in it.
The lead-in question from Reese was essentially like, well, other than the film, Gary, what would you do? So, okay, so if we set that aside,
No,
blah, blah, blah. Like, it is a thankless task.
It absolutely is. And I've been saying all along, it doesn't matter because if one of those teams wins out, they'll be in the college football playoff. But here's where it does matter. Here's where it does matter. Let's say Michigan State loses this week and then beats Penn State at the end. So they're sitting there with 2 losses. And let's say Michigan wins this week and then loses to Ohio State, and they're sitting there with 2 losses. And one of them gets a spot in the Rose Bowl because Ohio State is going to the playoff. You know who decides who goes to the Rose Bowl?
Committee.
The committee.
Yeah.
So that is where it matters.
Yeah.
And that would be fascinating.
A lot of Big Ten teams can be in that New Year's Six mix.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Were they to choose Michigan over Michigan State, with Michigan State having won the head-to-head.
For most deserving for the Rose Bowl. One most deserving. Yeah, we got a few weeks to figure it out.
I do want to ask you about Wisconsin. It is clear that the committee continues to hold them in fairly high esteem. We've seen the Badgers rally from 1-3 now to 7-3, 6 straight wins. These last 2 have been overwhelming wins against not great competition. But what do you make of Wisconsin as potentially here the team that could be disruptive in the Big Ten championship game? They're almost certainly not going to make it with 3 losses. Right. That would be crazy, right, for them. I mean, you'd have to have total
haven't
chaos.
Even seen a 2-loss team.
Yeah, we haven't seen a 2-loss team make it, so it seems like a huge jump. But they're clearly a good team, and the committee clearly likes them.
I get frustrated looking at what Wisconsin is now and thinking about what they perhaps could have been. And there's no way to get to the point that the Badgers are at right now without going through what they went through earlier in the season. And I've been terming it as a crisis of concept that they were going through earlier in the year, where you had youth on the offensive line, you had inexperience in the backfield, but you did have this what's viewed as an uber-talented quarterback in Graham Mertz. And so Paul Chryst and his staff were going through the process of trying to determine whether or not, because where Wisconsin has been for at least a decade at this point, they can be the best team in the Big Ten West. They haven't shown themselves as maybe the best team in America. That is a discussion they're normally left out of. And in this college football playoff era, for Wisconsin to go to that step, not just we're going to win the division and then go lose to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, can they win a national championship? The growth we're seeing right now is the growth Wisconsin has to make, because they've got that potential to be in the national championship discussion, but who they've normally been isn't quite good enough for that. Problem is, they weren't that team earlier in the season. Graham Mertz wasn't ready for it. Skill position players weren't ready for it. Our offensive line wasn't quite ready for it either. So they couldn't execute the passing attack at as high a level. Frankly, even the defense is balling out at a higher level now than the Badgers defense was early in the year. They are on par with Georgia, not just statistically, but they've got more pass rushers, like more individually special pass rushers than the Georgia Bulldogs have up front. They're all going to get a bunch of guys drafted, man. So when you look at the growth of the offense, the growth of the defense, what I see from the Badgers right now can threaten anyone in the country. I don't care if you're talking Georgia, I don't care if you're talking Ohio State. Whoever makes it out of the East Division in the Big Ten championship game, if they're facing this Badger squad, they're going to have their hands full.
Would have been fascinating had they figured out a way to beat Penn State, right? I mean, they were right there, right, in the red zone. And then you'd be looking at a 2-loss team that was really hot down the stretch. And then if they do knock off.
And obviously the Notre Dame game would have had to play out like the final score, the pick sixes and everything.
I hear you. Right. I mean, but they were winning in the fourth quarter.
Exactly.
Game, right? So, yeah, I don't know. It is really interesting. Again, they're not alone from the West in not being able to beat whoever comes out of the East. And the West never won the Big Ten championship game. So lump them in with Iowa and Northwestern and the other teams who have been there that can't crack that code.
But I think the Badgers discussion is a little different, where Northwestern, like winning the Big Ten West is spectacular for them. We see it so much from the Badgers. Right. What is that next level for Wisconsin's program?
Very few programs would benefit more from an expanded college football playoff than Wisconsin, because they would have been in it a number of times in the 12-team format. So we shall see. All right, lots more coming up. A little bit of a rough Tuesday night in the Big Ten basketball-wise. Purdue was great. Rutgers, Northwestern, and Iowa all pulled away late after sluggish starts. But 2 Gavitt games losses, Michigan falling to Seton Hall and Nebraska taken out by Creighton. And adding injury to insult, Nebraska announcing after the game that Trey McGowan's broke his foot in that one. He's out indefinitely. McGowan's 17 double-figure games a year ago. Fred Hoiberg called him the heart and soul of their team. He was clearly crushed afterward as he discussed it. Andy Katz, kind enough to stop by. This is a really tough blow for Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean, Trey McGowan's came to Nebraska to elevate the Husker program from Pitt. Now his brother Bryce, who had a great start to the season, was on board. And in talking to Trey in the preseason, he really felt like this was going to be his year. And I'm not saying that it's done, but it doesn't look great. And Fred Hoiberg also believed in Trey McGowan's leadership, the fact that he was all in. Sometimes it takes a little time with a transfer. And they really had good momentum off of last season, despite all the disruptions that Nebraska went through with that crazy schedule when they were sidelined because of COVID, and then they jammed all these games in.
Like a game every other night.
Yeah. But they felt like they really had a lot of momentum. Then that loss to start the season at Western Illinois really stung. And so, okay, let's put that aside. And then you get your rivalry game at home against Creighton, and McGowan's goes out early. So this is a really tough situation for Nebraska. Cody Webster coming back is huge for them, but they're going to have to sort of find another gear because this was a team I really believed was an NCAA tournament team. Now, without Trey McGowan's, it's going to be tough. I mean, they're going to really have to, sort of manufacture points, rely on younger guys, and really definitely change a little bit the way they play and be a little more tough, grindy, and gritty rather than just sort of all up and down.
Right, and on the interior, they struggled last year. Now they have some guys they think can address that, Eduardo Andre and Walker, and I think we've seen, an infusion of some size in some of the newcomers they've brought in. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they've been an up and down team, and Trey McGowan's part of the motor for that. And then Bryce McGowan's had an off night last night too. You wonder how much maybe mentally he was checked out with his brother being hurt, or whether it was just that Creighton's a pretty good team. That can be part of it too, and he's a young player. But it's tough to see 1 and 2. They're really not shooting well. They're under 40% for the year. Let's get into a positive.
Can I say one quick thing? The positive for Nebraska is they have a great home court, and they had a packed house last night. And so I just want to say this, that if they can use that to their advantage, win some games at home, and just try to tread water on the road, then they have a chance. Mm-hmm. They do have a great home court with fans back.
Yep, no doubt. Purdue was fabulous last night. I mean, we were in here with Rayfeld Davis, and all three of us were just, wow, right? I mean, again, I know it's Wright State, but Wright State has won the Horizon regular season 3 years in a row. This is a team that will certainly be in the hunt for an NCAA tourney bid. I mean, they didn't look like they belonged on the same court. It's 51-17 at halftime. Just the front court dominance of Purdue is staggering how good they are.
So the two of us have been doing this for quite some time.
Yes, we have.
And
don't age us.
So
half our lifetimes.
I know.
Yes.
And so I dismiss this idea that, it's just Wright State. First of all, to your point, Wright State's pretty good.
Yes.
Within the Horizon League. But when you see a team that is at another level, and we are seeing that with Travion Williams coming off the bench, Zach Edey, who is essentially unstoppable. It's almost like it's a little bit of a Nerf ball up there for him. And so the fact that Jaden Ivey had an off night and they absolutely destroyed Wright State is significant. Caleb First, who was sort of the undersold newcomer, has been, he had a great night. Brandon Newman, another player sort of in the rotation, solid night for him. And Mason Gillis is coming off a suspension, which is another really strong rotation player for Purdue. So we know this is a team that's going to be there in the end. I thought that they were the pick in the Big Ten, even though Michigan got a lot of that love. But I think after last night, just with our own eye test, Purdue's, I think, the favorite.
Really interested to see them against Carolina. It's not a great Carolina team at this point, but that'll be a bigger test. Baycott in the middle is a really good player who's coming on. So that it seems to me you'll learn more about Purdue coming up this weekend.
And if they win, because I expect Villanova to knock off Tennessee, then they're taking on Villanova.
Right.
Top 10 game on Sunday. Villanova had a 10-point lead at UCLA. I mean, they are really, really good. Like that could be a Final Four game
Con Gillespie back.
Yes,
Yeah.
with Villanova and Purdue, if that occurs on Sunday.
So that's something to look forward to this weekend. What about Michigan? They led Seton Hall by 11 points in the second half. Just kind of let it slip away on a day where they announced the contract extension for Juwan Howard, which is fabulous. I know Wolverines fans incredibly fired up about that. It just felt like beyond kind of the big two, the guys who you know are going to be there, they didn't have a whole lot. I thought Eli Brooks played really well, and you know what you've got in the middle, but beyond that, Caleb Houston kind of looked a little lost out there. Seton Hall is a very good defensive team, but did you read anything into it?
Well, I thought this was a great example of a very experienced team in Seton Hall going after the newcomers from Michigan. Caleb Houston, who will be a really good player for
No
them,
doubt.
an elite player. But this was sort of a wake-up call to elite level basketball when Seton Hall went right at him. Devontae Jones, there is going to always be an adjustment from Coastal Carolina level to Michigan. Mike Smith obviously did a great job of that from Columbia to Michigan, but Duncan Robinson, they've been very fortunate.
Yes, they have.
It doesn't always happen. And so they've had a couple examples where it has, so now you expect, it comes from Coastal Carolina to the Big Ten, everything's gonna be fine. There's a little bit of a speed and physicality adjustment, and I know they're not playing a Big Ten team, but I equate Big East or Big 12, they're all on the same level. So I think that adjustment's gonna take some time. Eli Brooks, he came in late with that little floater that was big, but he's gonna have to probably even do more of that, where he's gonna have to be the guy, because as good as Hunter Dickinson is, he's still a big. Someone has to get him the ball in a late game situation. So work to do, but I thought that Seton Hall, you gotta give them credit. They came in and they were the more physical and more defensive-minded team in this game.
Well, they were great on the perimeter. They held Michigan to 3 of 15 from three. And again, their opponents were shooting 11% from three on the year coming in. So you would kind of expect that. But yeah, Michigan was really good inside. Dickinson is fabulous, as we know. I mean, there's no question about his abilities. Just a tremendous player.
Can I add one quick thing on the Juwan Howard
You can do
thing?
whatever you
All right.
want.
I
This
just
is
wanna
your
say,
show.
I know, because we didn't get a chance to say this last night.
I'm just here to tee you up.
I just want to say that I think when he was hired, so deserving. He put in great time down as an NBA assistant, a lot of years. But I just can't think of another transition that has gone as smooth from someone like John Beilein, who was exceptional. I think is a Hall of Famer. Did great work for us here. But from Beilein to Juwan Howard, it has been seamless to where
incredible.
Michigan is an elite program every year, and there's been zero drop. And the talent level is going to keep getting better and better. So I just want to put that out there.
It's been amazing. Just an amazing hire. I want to talk about tonight. We got Michigan State and Butler. This was not a great Butler team last year. Now, they bring back basically their entire team. So this is not a test on the caliber of Kansas, nowhere near a test on the caliber of Kansas for Michigan State. But you're still going into Hinkle, and it's a hostile environment and all that stuff. What are you looking for tonight from the Spartans?
Max Christie, because he can be an elite player in this league and around the country. And, we've seen little flashes, but this could be a great sort of, opening for him, if you will, to the national stage, but also for Michigan State to deal with a hostile environment. You're saying packed Hinkle Coliseum certainly will be interesting.
What about Indiana tonight against St. John's? That's another big-time game. Mike Anderson, coach at St. John's, so you know what you're going to get there, right? They're going to be in your grill for 40 minutes. We've wondered at times about this Indiana backcourt in recent years. This could be a big test for them.
Huge test. Posh Alexander, one of the best defensive players in the Big East and really good playmaker for St. John's. So how does Indiana handle him? And then Julian Champagny doesn't play the same like Trace Jackson Davis, but that's going to be an interesting matchup. Should be a great atmosphere at Assembly Hall. These two matchups, I think the Big Ten will save a little face here in the Gavitt games because I like both Michigan State on the road and Indiana at home.
Has not gone particularly well
Yes.
for the Big Ten to this point. We're going to see some familiar faces, by the way, on St. John's. Montez Mathis, Aaron Wheeler, so a couple of Big Ten transfers. Speaking of familiar faces, there's going to be one on our air tonight. Maryland trying to stay perfect, 20th ranked team in the nation, hosting George Mason. Do you have any idea who's announcing that game?
I believe myself and Jason Ross. But speaking of transfers, Fats Russell and Kudus Wahab two of the best transfers in the country so far.
You've been working on Caduce now
Yes.
this has been like a months-long project for you. I'm excited. Saturday is big here on the Big Ten Network with Big Ten Tailgate from Wrigley Field. We have 4 conference football matchups and a primetime wrestling showdown all Saturday on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Go to btn.com/gamefinder for channel locations in your area. Make sure you know which BTN channel your game is going to be on. Anthony's Power Rankings, the Impact 5. We like to count them down Letterman style each week. Where are you going?
Casey Kasem style? Maybe.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to start with the number 5 slot, as we tend to do here on a weekly basis. And to me, it's a team that their record does not indicate how well they've played for stretches this season. It's Penn State. Because I think the Nittany Lions, when they've had a healthy Sean Clifford, they have shown themselves to be one of the most competent teams. And when you're looking at both phases of the ball, an explosive offense and a dominant defense, quite frequently, as a team that can get it done at a high level. They just had that stretch in the middle of the season where Clifford was banged up. You lose to Iowa, you lose to Illinois. Now folks have forgotten about them. And now they're in the thickest stretch of difficult games, and they're not quite making it happen. I don't think that the Penn State Nittany Lions are done, though. I still see a win or two that's likely to come by the end of the schedule because they're still playing well.
That's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day. Like, what if their games had just been in different orders?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what if they had beaten Auburn early in the year, but what if the Wisconsin game had been 2 weeks ago and Sean Clifford played well and they won that game? I think you just look at them differently. Now it's kind of, well, they got their work done early here this year and they got really high in the rankings, and then it kind of went south on them. I do think kind of the timing of the schedule is the perception of that's interesting. Okay, so you've got them at number 5. Where are you going after that?
At number 4, I've got Michigan State. You know, and it's not because I think the Spartans aren't playing well. I think they're getting it done. Where there's other teams who are continuing to get better in phases of the game, I think Michigan State is still playing really well. I don't think they're necessarily getting better where they have to get better. Like Peyton Thorne, it was nice to see him not turn it over as frequently last week and get back to some of that explosive passing. But defensively, I don't think their defense is as bad as the stats show, but it's not much better than what we thought it was throughout the year either. They're not rushing the quarterback quite as well as they were early in the year. And overall, you know, it's the Spartans that, you know, they need to get better in the red zone for this matchup we were just talking about with Ohio State this weekend if they use the approach I mentioned. But that red zone defense hasn't been as good lately as it was early in the year either.
You've given them bulletin board material.
Good.
Yeah.
Drag them into the deep end. Make it happen. I'm going to be watching. I know that much. Well, I guess I'll be on
the 7th best team in the country is the 4th best team in the Big Ten, according to Big Ant. Okay, where are you going after that?
It's because Wisconsin is really good,
They are
man.
good.
That's the reason why.
Yes.
I just see where the Badgers, in total, yes, they were a 3-loss squad. Best 3-loss team in America for whatever that's worth. It's certainly not going to be worth the trip to the college football playoff this season. But when you're looking at the growth and maturation of Graham Mertz, that's what stands out most amongst all of it. Because it got to the point where I was joking about it right here on this set, where essentially all they were allowing Graham Mertz to do was take the snap from center. And then beyond that, they just said, make sure you don't mess it up, kid. He was struggling to even hand it off. The mesh point was a problem for Wisconsin at certain points of the season. Now they've been able to lean on that offensive line that leans on the opponent. And now at times, even after mistakes, they can lean on Graham Mertz. And who would have thought a month or so ago that would be true about where Wisconsin's at offensively? And that defense, man, that's been balling the entire year, they're even better. It's the best defense in America.
Defense is incredible. I mean, I guess I would just say, to play devil's advocate, Northwestern's had 5 games now where they've given up 33 or more points in conference play. That equals their total from the regular season for the last 5 years in conference play. So, yes, he got it done against Rutgers, and yes, he got it done against Northwestern. Again, if it were a better defense, would he still be throwing the ball like that? We'll find out. I mean, they're going to face some better defenses, so we shall see. So that's number 3. So I'm guessing you go Michigan next?
That is exactly where I'm going. And with the number 2 team, I do agree that they're as complete as most teams would hope to be. And it's fortunate for them. They've got depth in the backfield. They're so deep. They've got a 5-star true freshman running back who barely sees the field, and it hasn't mattered for them. They seem solidified with what they're doing with Cade McNamara at quarterback. I don't think it means we won't see J.J. McCarthy again for certain stretches this year also. But, you know, just letting him sit back and look at things for a little while is probably a healthy thing for him, for their offense as a whole. And just week after week, man, there's a new playmaker that emerges, whether it's a receiver, a tight end, somebody on the outside with skill and speed is coming up in the passing attack. The offensive line's been good the whole year. We know what they get done on defense. There's not a tandem of just two individual edge rushers with their hand in the dirt that can get it done at the same level that Michigan's can, man. Between Ojabo and Hutchinson, they just get after the quarterback, and you can't game plan for both of them at the same time.
No obvious weakness.
No.
We've talked a lot about Ohio State, so you've got them number one. Just a quick thought on them.
It's because the Buckeyes, where they're not as good as Michigan's special teams. They're certainly not as good as Michigan defensively, but that particular phase, if there's any one phase of any team's game that's at its best, Georgia's defense would rank to me right behind Ohio State's offense. There's just that side of the ball for the Buckeyes. There's just not much any opponent has shown they can do with them. If you control the run, they light you up in the pass. If you play the pass, they can get Henderson and Williams and a bunch of other backs going. C.J. Stroud has that Heisman-type opportunity this weekend to thrust himself in the middle of that discussion. There's not a quarterback playing better than him. They're just too good on that side of the ball.
Yeah, it was good to see them get Mayan Williams involved again this week.
Right.
And yeah, to your point, I mean, they lead the nation in scoring, lead the nation in yards per play.
If there's an offensive stat, they're pretty good at it.
Yeah, they're really good. They are.